Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. If you want to stay in the loop, all things Security Weekly, visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. Find out about all of the shows on the Security Weekly network. Subscribe via your favorite podcast catcher. We have a YouTube channel. We live stream there and on Twitch. You can join our mailing list and sign up for our Discord server, or sign up for our mailing list and join our Discord server, all by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe. Mr. Lee Neely has joined us. Welcome, Lee.
Good to be here. Back, finally getting off work to do some fun stuff like talk to some cool people.
Absolutely. Joining us, said cool person for this segment, Michael Welch. Michael is the managing director for Morgan Franklin. He joins us today to discuss the ramifications of a cyber-physical attack and how can have on ill-prepared organizations. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Michael, how did you get your start in information security?
About 22 years ago, I used to play professional baseball and tore a knee up and wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And my brother threw a book at me and I read it and been doing cybersecurity ever since. So it's been a journey throughout the entire time, but it's I love it.
So you literally got the book thrown at you.
He literally threw the book at me. He said, awesome. Figure this out.
What team did you play for?
Texas Rangers. I played in their minor league system for about 5 years, and then an injury ended that prematurely.
Oh, darn.
Didn't you say before we went on the air you just blew out your knee again?
No, I blew out my left knee when I was playing. I blew out my right Achilles tendon when I was playing with my kids.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily time for a career change.
Not yet.
Okay.
So you didn't do the Achilles doing the cyber-physical stuff, so that's good.
Not at all. Not at all.
Good.
Yeah, so Michael, I wanted to talk about cyber. What do you mean by cyber-physical? Because there's a lot of different ways I think we could take this topic.
Yeah, when I look at cyber-physical, I mean, I spent about 15 years in the utility space. I work with generation sites, control centers, substations. I was a global CISO for a manufacturing firm. So when I look at cyber-physical, it's really taking a lot of those mechanical, old way of doing things, and as they're digitizing them, moving them to intelligence, where they're actually intelligent devices, so it's a stage. So because the business wants that information out of the system, healthcare, I mean, almost every vertical out there is using some form of OT, IoT. So that when I look at cyber-physical, it's really about those old mechanical way of doing things are now moving to a digital platform.
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of cases in the past where, yes, they're devices that are connected to the network, they have software on them, but there are certain physical controls in there, and I think it's important that those translate as those devices become connected. For example, we covered a story about setting a printer on fire remotely, but there's physical safeguards against that. Those things are still very important, correct?
100%. I mean, even when you look at how you managed like a control system at the set points, I mean, making sure that you got the controls that doesn't allow somebody, because it's digitally connected now, to change something that it shouldn't do. So having those safeguards in place, which aren't always there now, but is critical to support that digital transformation.
And that's not just protecting security reasons, but human error as well.
A lot of human error. I mean, just traditional, like you said, safety systems, video systems, elevators. I mean, you name it. Everything is connected now, right? I mean, everything has some level of intelligence. So it's really about how we helping the safety of people, but also the equipment. Like you said, just from the person moved the mouse and clicked the button, but they weren't supposed to. Did they have a safeguard in place there to prevent that action from occurring?
But there's also software controls as well, in addition to hard, and it's a balance between the two, no?
There is a balance, but of course, I mean, a lot of times when we're looking at like control systems, they are a lot of times built for a functional purpose, not security purpose. So, I mean, because they have all these agreements in place, service level agreements to make sure, hey, this system has got to do this. And when you introduce security, it changes some of those service level agreements. So it's really about how do you handle that? How do you manage that? How do you work with that supplier to make sure the software is doing what it's supposed to do, configuring it properly for the security safeguard, but making sure it can still function, especially when you talk about the grid, critical infrastructure. I mean, a utility, a power plant, you can't just flip the switch and change and do a config change. It has to be planned. It has to be during an outage. So there's so many pieces and parts that come with that really what's put them at risk is the inability for what we can do on the business side. You can't traditionally do on what we call OT or cyber-physical side. So it's working with them to understand that and try to work with the suppliers to build that into their actual systems, their controls. A lot of these systems are older legacy systems that really weren't meant for those features and functions.
I think predominantly what we've seen, sorry, Lee. Go
ahead.
Predominantly what we've seen is attackers going after one particular physical system, right, that might be connected. And that's oftentimes what we see. What concerns me more is, the Russia attacking Ukraine style attack where it was coordinated and they're combining together digital and physical, affecting physical devices, right? They turn the lights off after they turn the power off. Lights went off in the control room, things like that. Have you seen more of these coordinated attacks? Because those are the ones that keep me up at night.
Yeah, I mean, that one especially, I think they even coordinated it where they brought down the telecommunication system so you couldn't even call out.
Right.
So it was but that was a nation state targeting another nation state for whatever the reasons that they wanted. But I mean, it's always the risk for that. I mean, but realistically, I think the way we're set up here in the States, I mean, of course, we have to look at this globally. If a attacker wants to really target you, they're going to target you in many ways. So it is something that we always, as practitioners, have to think about. I mean, look at COVID with the pandemic plan. These weren't things that we thought, but now we have to actually build that in. The same thing goes here. What is that next attack? What is that coordinated attack? Is it just the systems, or is it our communications? Is it our help desk? I mean, they target all of them, so you have no way to call out, and you have to revert to your manual way of doing things. And as we move to digital, a lot of times those manual efforts are actually forgotten. So it's about pulling out the book off the shelf and figuring out what we need to do to stop this from happening.
Yeah. Sorry.
Does a lot of this, as you're thinking about this, we do have to consider a lot of where we're at with America. We're kind of legacy. We have a lot of systems controls in place. We have regulations in place. If we think about somewhere like Armenia, Paul, when I was there, I was talking to a lot of what they've rebuilt and having gone through a revolution in the last 8 months where they had a ton of lessons learned on how to protect themselves, issues with infrastructure, attacks that are going to happen. If you're starting to build this kind of from the ground up, does a lot of that responsibility fall on the vendors? Does that fall on the implementers? Does that fall on the people architecting this? Like, what is the kind of best course action as people are moving forward to try and redesign this from the ground up?
It's a great question. I mean, when I was working purely in the utility space, we would actually work with the vendor. We would do what they call factory acceptance testing before they came to site. We would sit there, we would coordinate, we would plan what are these systems supposed to do, and we build security in before they even shipped it right to the factory. I mean, to the site, because you have a small outage window. Same thing goes to what you just mentioned. It is really a collective. I mean, it has to be the suppliers; they have to be part of the solution. It's got to be the company. It's even got to be the government who regulates certain things, enforcing that they do work together. And it's not just about how many systems we can stand up. It's do these systems have the ability to be resilient to attack? Because it's not like you have a second one sitting behind you that you can just bring up and online, because that's cost. I mean, it's cost prohibitive. So it's really about figuring it out as a collective. Not if you're just doing it in a silo with one way, you're never going to come to a solution that would be workable.
And the other missing piece there that I think a lot of places don't realize is the business aspect of this. When we start to talk about OT and ICS, right, like you have to integrate the different bidding vendors that are perhaps buying certain hours or producing energy and pushing it back or pushing it out. All of those business aspects that have to have access to the data, have to access to the real-time telemetry of the PLCs, of the generation site, all of those things come back to a business decision where business is actually being integrated and has to have that communication channel, which a lot of people say, just air gap it. It's simple. Like, why do we have all these vulnerabilities? But it's a lot more complicated than that. So how do you kind of start some of those conversations and bring this to the forefront of the business conversation? We just had a BISO online. This would be fantastic insight and integration where the business has to correlate and integrate security and understand the risk while still providing the data that's necessary for them to do their job.
No, 100%. And I think they're starting to have that conversation because they are getting, here in the U.S., I could speak more about that, there's regulation out there. Like you mentioned, the business wants to know for maintenance, for outages, just getting the data so they can do their analytics. How are they trading their power? If they have one site down, we have to make sure we can support it over here, or healthcare. We need all this analytics. So the conversations are occurring. But you have to, but it's got to be that, it's got to go both ways. The business has their needs. The operation side has to work with them to determine how do we do this, that it's financially acceptable, but still transparent enough, but secure enough that we're not introducing risk. There's ways to do it. We used to set up that, but in the utility space, they have that Purdue model, right? You have all these different layers from where IO all the way out to a DMZ. Then you have, all right, how does the vendor come in and manage the system and emergency access? So those are all things that you have to think of, but you got to think about it early on. Right now, we're trying to retrofit a lot of stuff to try to quickly get things going, and you sometimes need to step back and say, okay, this is what we need. Is that business link? Is it read only? Well, if we have to manage it, do we use unidirectional firewall? So those are all conversations that have to take place. Unfortunately, I don't think they take place enough, but they are starting to happen because regulation is starting to push that. Like I said here, NERC SIP, not that it's the best regulation out there, but it is forcing them to do things all the way down to the supplier now. That the supplier has to actually, where their equipment comes from, how do they manage it, what is their requirements as they are supporting you. So it's happening because of all the issues that we see with ransomware and all those different items. It's a conversation that the board now is having, and once that occurs, you see things starting to happen.
Lee, you had a question?
My question is, and then you started to kind of get to it. It feels like you're running into recurring places where you'd wish they'd done more homework, more understanding before they got into this space. Or am I going too far?
No, it is. I think a lot of times when, let's say there's somebody standing up a new power plant, they're now building that into that whole commissioning process, because now there is a commissioning process that you have to step through. It's the legacy systems that are on the existing plants that make it a little bit more challenging to actually implement that and have that conversation, because they may not have budgeted for it. It's also all the protocols that we're working with right now. And on the IT side, we're more familiar with those protocols. On the utility side, or some of the other healthcare where you've got IoT, you got all these different protocols that weren't even designed for any security aspects. So how do you build that in? So it's working together once again, and with the supplier, with the different things. This is what we need to do to improve, and this is what has to happen over this roadmap, what it may be. And in the interim is what are those mitigations that we have to work with.
So
and then you have go ahead, Lee.
It's been a while since I gotten deep into IoT, or OT. That is the level of understanding in the cyber organization where it needs to be when you're showing up. I know that generally the IT folks involved with them that are hands-on know them backwards and frontwards, but sometimes cyber doesn't have a clue. Has that changed?
I think it's getting better, but the other factor is on the engineering side. So either in manufacturing or utility, you got the engineers that design the logic, design the control systems. They want to own that. Then you got the business that is the IT side that has the responsibility to build out the infrastructure on the outside leg of the firewall, and then you have IT security that's trying to protect the outer perimeter of the corporation. So they all are starting to work together yet, but it's not there on a regular basis across all industries. I see improvement, but there's definitely a lot more work to be done.
I think the other issue we run into, right, is we have all these great regulations. We have some enhancements to the different OT protocols. You've got layers on top of some of these older legacy protocols, but we're still fundamentally failing. You look at a lot of the OT attacks that happen, we're still fundamentally failing at adhering to good best practices, adhering to general security, like doing good things. You have vendor laptops that are connecting the internet and then coming into air gap networks. You got bad USB drives. You got cracked software all over because vendors, keep their software segmented, and like you have implementers that need to utilize it. So you have a ton of issues that are outside of both regulatory and kind of the compliance area and general security. You run into issues with behavior and adherence to kind of some of the best practices we've learned from mistakes over the years in the IT side. So how do we begin to kind of address some of that and spread some of the awareness around that?
I think that's starting to occur more, that you're starting to see some actually ICS vendors, actually technology that is really specific to the ICS networks, and they're starting to identify a whole number of vulnerabilities, because we're used to seeing them on Microsoft or all the IT assets, and those IT assets can't be plugged into the ICS side because they're just not made. The visibility of the equipment, the protocols that are being run, it falls back to a manual process. But it's just a matter of working together, trying to figure it out, and just understanding what is that? What are we trying to do? And like you said, it all started with, as we move to digital, we're trying to get the data out so business can make decisions. That's not going to go away. So it's a matter of how do we bring it in? And look at Colonial Pipeline, oil and gas. I mean, there was never really any type of regulation requiring them to do anything until this last breach occurred. So it's really just a matter of, all right, now what do we learn? What did we learn from that? And making sure, let's not wait to the next one. Let's make sure we take that and apply it to other industry. Is it water? Is it just utility? Is it already there? But autonomous vehicles, smart cars, smart grids, all these different things, there's going to be attacks. But so how do we do it now instead of waiting till we've been punched, right? And now we have to react to something rather than being proactive.
Michael, what's the carrot for the various utilities that you mentioned, right? I know power has NERC SIP in terms of regulation. Is the answer for other industries regulation? Is it the same regulation for all utilities? Is it individual ones? Is regulation even the answer?
I don't think it's the answer per se. I'm not one who says, hey, you got to be compliant to be compliant, but it is a driver. It is like you said, a carrot to really force them to do something. A lot of times they'll make business decisions without really looking at all angles, and cyber being one of them. Now, I think that changes a little bit more today because of how much media is out there, the volume of attacks, the impact that those attacks have. It's not about just stealing IP anymore. It's about, we're going to ransom you until you pay, which is now when it hits the bottom line, there's a lot more initiative to really do things that they're supposed to. So I do think regulation helps it. It's not the answer by itself. It's hard to say there'll be one regulation to fit all, right? But I do think it needs to exist, because they'll still be there. unfortunately, from a culture perspective, it's still the adage. I still hear them out there. Well, it hasn't happened to me yet, or
Right.
why is somebody going to attack me? Well, it probably already has happened to you. You just don't realize it yet. So it's just trying to change that conversation at the business side, and sometimes it starts at the board, and it's a slow process. But it's how, we have to continue. We can't just cower and go walk away and never come back to the conversation. It's about we have to keep pounding on that until they listen. And never do you want to see a breach, but hey, let's take advantage of it, right? Let's use that as a reason why we need to do these things, because we don't want to be that next news article.
Do you think that the government should start stepping in where the cyber physical starts to come into play? And do you think our response when we're under a cyber attack and it has to deal with a physical aspect that has safety implications, do you think that there is different responses as opposed to, say, something like a network attack or a ransomware breach? When we start to talk about physical or kinetic damage, what's kind of your take on the whole policy of the government getting involved and then our ability to react in equal or accordance measure?
I mean, unfortunately, we work in such silos, right? I mean, we don't share information across industry, across verticals. I mean, there's some of the ISACs out there that you do have some places that you can share data. But I do believe, once again, I'm not all for regulation, but I do believe sometimes when it comes to safety, safety has to be first. We preach that all the time in everything we do. It even comes before cyber. So if it comes down to the safety of people, life-threatening, if it's healthcare and you can impact surgical schedules and the equipment, or if it's manufacturing that you can impact supply chain and food can't get there. Yeah, I do think there is a place that government can step in to try to build a collective to force the industries to do something. It's not going to happen overnight. But once again, it goes back to that thing of we usually wait till something happens and then we put some type of security directive. Hopefully we learn from that and then we start to build something that we can actually move towards and move forward, move that needle. But it is a slow go because you'll get the people in their own space. Hey, you're not going to tell me what to do. So that's that back and forth. I mean, a lot of times they'll put a regulation, they'll put it out to industry for comment. So they give you the ability to respond and provide your input. And then eventually they come out with the regulation. I think that's a good way because you are getting input from the communities. You're not just trying to shove something down their throat for the purpose of shoving it.
I think it's interesting how you incentivize the utility companies, right? Because I forget who put it to me this way, and they're like, a power company, for example, they're one of the few companies in existence that actually wants you to use less of their product, right? And when we started seeing this more prominent use of ransomware style attacks against utility companies, I guess sort of think about like, how does the economics work? How do we end up in the situation where from an outsider, kind of outside of the industrial control systems looking in, going like, why haven't they put money into building out IT and a security program enough to be able to prevent some of these attacks? Like, how does the economics play into it, Michael? It's
a great question. I mean, as all security practitioners, it's hard to put ROI on security, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of times decisions are made on what is that ROI, and it's not tangible all the time. So the ROI is you haven't been breached.
In their case,
that you know of. So it is a tough conversation. It's a hard conversation. I mean, I know when I was a CISO, I had to talk to my board and ask for money. And I had to justify why. Well, it hasn't happened to us. We're old school. We still walk around our requisition orders. Well, as you move to the digital side, a lot of times it takes, hey, our customers are asking us what we're doing. There is no regulation in food manufacturing, except for like cyber defense as it relates to contamination. But when it comes to like the cyber equipment or just the IT equipment, there is no regulation. So how do you get them to do something, to spend the dollars? It's hard. I think, once again, it takes multiple industries from being attacked. We hate to see it. And to your question of the utility, I mean, the power grid is one. I'm glad there's regulation, because if the grid goes down, everything goes down.
Yeah.
That's the one industry that really impacts all.
Right.
But at the same time, if the bad actors, hackers, whatever term we want to use, or nation states target the grid, unless they're doing cyber warfare, they're actually defeating their purpose of the ransomware or whatever the ultimate thing is, because if they bring them down, they can't do what they need to do. So I think you see different kinds of attacks. You might see ransomware on the business side, all their customer data, but you don't see it as much down into the control systems. One, because I don't think it's there. I mean, of course, with the within the Ukraine with Black Energy and what they did there on how they trip stuff. Yeah, it can affect the OT side, but it's still not there to the point where, I mean, PLCs, I mean, I know Siemens just recently had the big vulnerabilities around their systems. So it's just one of those balances. It's how do we continue the conversation when they're not hearing it all, but they see what's going on, eventually they're going to act. Can we get them to act quick enough?
Yeah, because the consumer doesn't really play into that equation, because in most cases, I don't get to choose where my power, my water, or my gas comes from.
No, it comes from sometimes you'll get that letter in the mail that says, we just changed your utility. I mean, you got no say in it. I think there's some places that you may get to choose them, but for the most part, wherever you live, I live in Chicago, I got ComEd. And they're generating my power. Yeah, they're selling it to somebody, but that's who I got. And as the consumer, I don't have any other say in that matter.
Right. I can't go get water from someone else because it's more secure. I mean,
the good thing is I have my own well, so I don't get water from the city.
Yeah. So you take on all the risk yourself in that case.
But I got all the smart devices in my house that opens me up to another risk. So
right. And is your water pump, is that a smart device now too? Right?
It could be. I mean, mine right now is still a little bit old because it's an older house. But yeah, I mean, eventually everything is going to be smart, and each one of those give you an opportunity into the network.
Mm. Larry, Tyler, Lee, Jeff.
I got nothing. Fantastic conversation.
We've all kind of played in this space in some capacity.
I was going to say, from a physical standpoint, like we also have to start to think about and integrate things like IIoT, right? And even consumer grade products and production. It's not just in the OT space where we're talking about nuclear or power or regulation. We also have a lot of things happening that are controlling kinetic aspects of our life that are not getting as much attention, or don't have regulation, or maybe don't have security teams, or even they're not even located within this country, so we don't have control over that. Do you see that as a kind of another domain and aspect that should be considered and a larger body of governance brought in to manage some of that?
Yeah, I think if it went from a physical side, 100%. When it's safety, like I said, autonomous vehicles, as we're looking for that. I mean, smart grid. I mean, no longer does the meter reader come around to the back of your house and look at the meter. They just scan it from their car, right? So each one of those open a risk to a new risk. And like I said, I was talking about the IoT devices. I mean, there's all concerns with that. And can I use that to get back to the grid? Can I use that to impact your home in whatever way it is? Can I get into your car because now we have satellite or wireless and you plug your phone into it? Each one of those are things that we always have to think about or worry about. Now, as a consumer, I mean, we don't ever think about those things, but as security practitioners and working with, like on the consulting side now and trying to work with my clients, it's all right, what are you doing? Let's have this conversation. Let's help structure it in a way that we can take it to your board. Maybe they'll shoot it down, but maybe we got to go back. It just, I mean, as so much thing is going to go to intelligence, and it just opens up so much more risk to us as people. I mean, data points. I mean, I forgot what I forgot what the name of the video was. It talks about there's 5,000 data points on everybody, and our kids, it's going to be 10,000, 15,000 data points that you don't really think about it, but as a practitioner, we know the concern that's wrapped around that. So, I mean, what can they do? I mean, if North Korea, or Iran, or if it's Russia, or whoever it is, they don't have our well-being in hand. They're going to use it to either hit us or, impact society as a whole. COVID's changed everything, right? Everybody's working from home now.
Mm-hmm.
How much more risk does that bring into everybody's environment? Because let's say I have a friend of mine, their control center, they actually sequestered them and put them up in a hotel because they needed to make sure none of their control operators were going to get sick. They kept them in there. They took care of them. But that was to the levels. No, did we ever think that was ever going to happen? But now it has, because pandemic planning, we talk about it. Nobody ever thinks about it. But what do you do? How do you recover? How do you keep operating? It's here now. Now we know it can happen. Did we learn? Will we learn our lesson, and will we take those lessons to improve every vertical?
I think the answer is, oh, hell yes.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
So,
if you're smart.
I'm thinking about shenanigans over the last year and a half. What keeps you awake at night? What are you worried you're going to run into now that you didn't worry about before?
Now, as on the consulting side, I worry about all our clients, right? Everything, because they're all in different stages. I think just ransomware is one of those things that so many people, it's not new. It's just getting so much more relevant, so much more often because they're getting paid, right? I know the IRS, I think it was the Treasury, came out, hey, you can't pay if they're on this list. That's my biggest concern for there, because if I have, like I said, I just went to have my Achilles tendon surgery. So what happens if I was there and their systems went down in the middle of the surgery? So I think that's my concern, that we're not prepared for that big attack in the healthcare space or in the utility space. Although the way those systems here in the States are built, they're pretty well protected. They're nested down multiple layers. There's a lot of in the interconnects and the grid. It's set up in a way that you can load shed and stuff like that. So that side I don't worry about, but I worry about the other side and then it causing chaos and then what can happen from that.
Do you think with your customer engagements, are you able to move that bar or help them move that bar where it needs to be, or at least closer, or are you hitting a brick wall?
Some of them a little bit more mature and they're more willing to understand and accept it. There's still some out there that we hit the brick wall. It's just one of those things that hopefully it doesn't happen to them before they make that decision, because you don't want it to be, I told you so. You never want that. So, but we know not everybody moves at the same pace. Not everybody has the budget or has the resources to get where they need to go. Look at CMMC coming out down the road now with all the companies doing business with the DIB. In the past, we used to do our own self-attestations. Well, now you're required to get certified by a third party. That's going to change the landscape for a lot of these companies on how they do business moving forward. I think that's something like that type of maturity model, hopefully will be enforced across other industries, even though in healthcare we have high trust and stuff like that. Utility, we have NERC-CIP. Now we have that TSA pipeline. We got NISTR. We got some things out there. It's just a matter of, is there enough teeth behind them to force the companies or encourage the companies to do the right thing? Am I going to spend the dollars ahead of time to try to reduce that risk? Or am I going to spend the dollars after? And now my reputation's tarnished. Financially, we're impacted. And when you look at that whole risk model, there's a lot more that can happen to you on a negative if you wait too long.
Michael, there's someone was talking to me about the utilities in their push to the cloud. Do you see a trend where industrial control systems can move some of their operations and computing infrastructure to the cloud? And does that? I do
not believe so. Now, there may be data they put up in the cloud. I don't believe. When you look at the BES electric system, they have categories that you can classify them: high, medium, or low. High and medium will never go to the cloud. There's just way too much risk. And that becomes life safety and everything else. Low, maybe distribution, maybe they want to get data and do analytics. That possibly can go to the cloud. If you're talking about water, oil and gas, they may be more inclined to go there, but personally, I would not put those types of systems where it could impact individual people or companies or households up in the cloud.
Do you ever get proposals on that line where you just want to say, what were you thinking?
I've seen them. I know, like, once again, we go back to NERC SIP, they pretty much don't allow it. Yet. That could change. Now, the cloud is getting better. The cloud providers can build an infrastructure and the core base foundation a lot better because they have more resources, more dollars that the companies can bring their stuff in there. Like you said, we talked about in the previous one, containerize it, just build it out. And then the utility has a responsibility of protecting everything in it, but the cloud provider is protecting it on the outside. Do your third-party risk. It could happen. I think it's going to be a while before they're ready to push that level of equipment or the potential impact it could have up to the cloud.
Do you think cloud's ready for real time?
Maybe in some instances. I know it's a great question. I probably don't have the best answer, but I think because of connectivity, as that's getting better, real time becomes more potentially. But because of latency, that real time isn't really real time. I think we're a little bit away from doing things in real time. I think people will put things up in cloud for quality control and do some analytics because there's fantastic platforms up there. But real time operations, I don't want to be against cloud because I am a cloud first person right now. But that's a challenge, I think.
Yeah, I don't think it's quite there either. I think it can get there, but that worries me. But the analytics and some of the other functions, sure, but I don't know. I'm too old
real-time operating systems, they need to be like split second. And I just think, it's like you said, it's not there yet.
Yeah. So I was flashing back to when a coworker explained to me why they needed real time and why they weren't just using the commercial off-the-shelf OS to do the control system.
Yeah, a lot of those control systems are old. It's QNX for some, VxWorks. They're just scaled down for a certain function that can flip it on a dime. And I apologize for cutting you off a little bit there, but yeah, it's that a traditional OS doesn't work in that way. You can do the embedded OSs that maybe run a little bit faster, but the regular Windows OS has so much overhead in it, it just would impact the decisions that the logic needs to be running almost immediately, milliseconds.
So, no apology needed for the cutoff. You said exactly the question I didn't finish. You answered exactly what I didn't finish asking.
Nice.
Thank you.
More questions for Michael?
I got none.
Michael, are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
I am. I'm kind of scared, but I am.
3 words to describe yourself.
Passionate, calm, and the last one's tough because I like to listen. It's not 3 words, but I'm a listener.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Switchblade.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
The Unknown.
Favorite hacker movie?
That's a tough one. I heard the previous one, and that would have been would have been Sneakers, but I like Black Hat. That was a good one. I like Snowden. Was also a good one.
Okay.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Fictional or otherwise.
Because I love The Matrix, Keanu Reeves. I think I just like him, his personality.
Solid choice.
Female.
This is 2021. It doesn't have to be female.
No, true. My mother would kill me then. I'll go with Jennifer Aniston.
Michael,
I'm not really creative when it comes to that.
Good Hollywood power couple right there.
There you go.
Yes,
Michael, thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly.
my pleasure.
Coming up next, the security news. Stay tuned.